Hey, Typology friends. This is Ian Morgan Cron, host of Typology, the podcast on which we explore the mystery of the human personality and the human adventure through the lens of the Enneagram. I'm joined, of course, by my friend of well over 10 years, Anthony Skinner. Anthony.
Ian, I noticed that you have a brand new book on the shelf behind you there.
I do. It's the advanced reader copy of my new book, The Fix.
Woo-woo!
With the longest subtitle in publishing history.
Yes, give us that subtitle.
The subtitle is The Fix, How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and Everyone in Between.
Yes, and now you can go ahead and flip the page to chapter 2.
That's right, because that basically is chapter 1. We just thought we'd throw it all on the cover.
That's awesome. And tell us about, so have you been on a bit of the tour? Have you been having some conversations around it so far?
Well, the book is available for pre-order right now, so folks could just hop on Amazon and pre-order it. However, it drops officially on January 28th. And in advance of that, I literally have, I think at last count, more than 30 or 40 podcast interviews lined up. And I'm going to be traveling to multiple cities to do book signings in different bookstores. And I'd actually love to hear from people if they have a bookstore nearby or a city they think it would be cool to come to. We're still in the process of putting together that itinerary. But I'm stoked, man. I am so excited about this book and just the idea of talking about this amazing design for living called the 12 Steps, and how not just for people who are alcoholics or drug addicts or food addicts or whatever, that they're really for everybody, and that everyone can derive the same benefit from working them as people who are in recovery for specific addictions. Because, let's not go any further. I'm just so stoked for people.
Like the Enneagram, the 12 Steps is an amazing tool.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it is an amazing tool for transformation.
In fact, the other day, someone asked me a question that blew my mind, and this is a good one for our listeners to try. Someone said to me today, just over dinner, they looked at me and they went, "Why were you born?" And I thought, what? And they're like, "Yeah, tell me why you were born." And I was like, okay. And the thing that came out of my mouth was, I was born to introduce people to ideas and experiences that deepen and improve their lives. And this is why this book was such a great experience for me. And the road back to you was, and the story of you, because they were just introducing people to ideas and experiences that would,
and it has a personal element to it too. Right?
Well, yeah. Gosh, a big personal element. So anyway, I'm super stoked, and I'm super stoked about our guest today because Dr. Alison Cook may not know this, but I've read her books, which, as you know, isn't something I get to do with every single person who comes on in advance. But I actually reached out specifically to her people, quote unquote, to get her on the show because I just loved her book. Specifically, I loved Boundaries for Your Soul. And I'm so excited about this new book, I Shouldn't Feel This Way, Name What's Hard, Tame Your Guilt, and Transform Self-Sabotage into Brave Action. Alison, welcome to the show, you Enneagram 3 with a 2-wing.
You already know me. I'm so happy to be here. It's so wonderful. I listen to you guys, and it's just great to be with you today. Thank you for having me.
Okay, I have all kinds of things I want to talk about because I love your work on internal family systems, and we'll explain to people what that means and what it is. And I'm just excited for all the work that you're doing. And we have a common Northeastern history, even though that's not where you grew up. That is where you went to college. We went to the same graduate school for psychology. And how fantastic. This is going to be rich.
I love it. Yes. I don't often meet people who kind of take my similar academic trajectory. So this is super fun.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. The Enneagram. How did you learn it? What do you think of it as somebody in the mental health field? And tell me what you love about it and what kind of irks you about it. Because it's not a question I ask people, but just go ahead, give it a shot.
Yeah, I love the Enneagram. I think it's a super helpful naming tool. I shouldn't feel this way. I talk about naming tools, and I think the Enneagram is one of the best. It helps name a type, a personality type. It helps as a therapist. I find it sort of becomes a shortcut, not to pigeonhole somebody, but to get a conceptual framework for the kind of person I'm dealing with, and even some of the language I might use with that person. So to answer your question, I first heard about it maybe 15 years ago. I was part of a spiritual formation community called LTI, Leadership Transformations, Inc. I don't know if you're familiar with Steve Macchia.
Oh, yeah.
He does these spiritual formation communities, kind of spiritual direction communities in the Northeast. And so I was part of a 2-year retreat community. We did quarterly retreats, and he introduced me to the Enneagram through that experience. They give it to us. It was super transformational for me. I had been trained in psychology and trained as a therapist, but it brought that spiritual direction lens to that work, which was just so powerful to me. But during that time, I took the Enneagram in and I tested out as a very proud 2. As a Christian woman, I'd grown up, in a rural area, Bible believing churches, Enneagram 2, I was just proud. I think Richard Rohr talks about how, is it Richard Rohr who talks about how a lot of times women will test out as Enneagram 2s, and I just fit that perfectly, very proud to be an Enneagram 2, which was probably the first clue that was not what I really was.
Right.
And then slowly over time, just God really used the tool to reveal kind of that Wizard of Oz moment, kind of what's the thing beneath the thing. And that 3-part, and I use that language of parts. That's really what I love about merging what I do with IFS with the Enneagram. That 3-part of me was really what was driving the whole story all along. And I can see it now throughout my history, but was very much in denial about that, had a lot of shame about that. So it was really a profound journey for me with the Enneagram, very helpful to me, both as a clinician and as a human.
So as a 3, and we'll get to parts in a minute, what's been like the core of your work spiritually and psychologically?
Yeah, that's a great question. That 3-part of me, again, it's hard for me not to use that language because that's just how I conceptualize my own soul, but it surfaces as sort of an adolescent energy that has some real drive, that has a lot of energy. I think because of so many messages I got as a young woman, that part of me didn't grow into a healthy understanding of what excellence is, and that being someone who loves work, I love work, and honoring that desire for excellence is the healthy part of the journey that I've come to. But gosh, even 10 years ago, that's still showing up as that I can prove myself. And having to do that in fairly subconscious, sneaky ways, because again, as a woman wanting to appear more, I didn't want to appear driven. I didn't want to be different from my peers. And so always minimizing. And that was what was interesting for me. I was in a small group of women. I said, the thing when I was still struggling with what number I was, is I said, I don't aggrandize myself. I don't brag. I don't boast. If anything, I minimize.
Ooh.
People will find out. My husband, when we were dating, and like after a few months, he's like, I don't feel like I know you because I so minimized accomplishments. Almost the deception was to that direction.
Okay.
Wow,
right?
Interesting.
And I remember my small group saying, so I do all these things, I got my PhD, I did all these things kind of quietly, but always minimizing them, trying to keep them quiet. And in that small group of women, I remember they said to me, but that's a form of deception. You're trying to manage people's perceptions of you.
Yes.
And that was sort of that moment of, so that's been the work of just actually claiming the goodness in wanting to be somebody. I can produce a lot. I enjoy it. I derive deep joy in it. Also, though, just so trying to own that while not letting it drive me in an unhealthy way.
Yeah. So, there's 3 subtypes of the 3, right?
Yeah.
The self-preservation, the social, and the sexual or one-to-one. And the counter type, which is this upside down expression of the passion of deceit, is the self-pres 3. And that 3 is what you're describing.
Interesting.
So unlike the social 3, which is the one that most people describe, right? They, would be more self-promotional, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The self-preservation 3 has the hardest time acknowledging that it's a 3. That's the first thing. Because they often will peg themselves as 6s. And they have, this is according to earlier, the quote we use oftentimes is a vanity about not being vain.
Yeah.
Ding, 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 ding.
Oh, that hurts.
So that's where the deeper deception is. It's like, so I was with a friend of mine this past weekend. I was leading a retreat for a group. I meet with this group 3 times a year. If they're listening right now, they know who they are. And one of them is a self-pres 3. And this person often says, this person's terrifically successful. Okay. I mean, over the top successful. And they're like, I drive a Volvo when I could drive a fleet of Rolls Royces. I don't talk about the fact that I went to the school. I went to Harvard Business School. I did this. And it's just fascinating and he doesn't dress in expensive clothes, always wears clothes that are very kind of plain. Yep. And yet, and so he knows he's a 3, but he's a self-pres 3, and you sound like a self-pres 3.
Yeah, that's dead on. Everything you just said, kind of just always trying, right? And so it's almost a growth curve to maybe, feel so, vulnerable, almost kind of owning some of the things I've done or, some of the things I could do. And some of that's true self, right? It's okay. That's a big journey for me right now, even with some of my friends. Just the true self of, I am excited about the work that I get to do. And yes, it takes up some of my time and I can't do some of these other things that you want me to do, and just owning that.
Yeah.
As opposed to trying to constantly manage all the perceptions around me, which isn't, like you said, it is a form of vanity.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So let's, before we get to talking about the new book, I Shouldn't Feel This Way, I want to talk a little bit about internal family systems. As I told you before we hit record, I led a retreat this past weekend with our mutual friend, Mike Cusick, with this small group of people. And we did a, kind of an introduction to internal family systems and helped these people develop a vocabulary. And this is why I love the Enneagram, and it's why I love internal family systems, right? You can't take an X-ray and find your parts, and don't worry, we'll explain that in a minute, nor can you see your personality type, right? But what these systems do is provide us with a vernacular or a vocabulary to talk about our inner experience of the world, and be able to do some really important healing work toward, I guess, integration and wholeness. First off, just quickly tell people what internal family systems is.
Yeah, so it's a model of therapy. I encountered it right at the end of my graduate work, and I was searching for something that I think IFS, that's the shortened form of it, integrates the therapeutic with the spiritual almost better than any other tool out there. That's my own opinion about it. And that's what I was searching for. I did my master's in counseling. I started a PhD in clinical psychology. I flipped into a joint PhD in psychology and religion because I was like, what are these statistics? I like statistics, but what are they really teaching me about the soul? And then it was at the end of all of that, I discovered IFS with my co-author, Kimberly Miller. She introduced me to it. And it's this model of therapy. Richard Schwartz discovered it. He was kind enough to endorse our book, Boundaries for Your Soul, which is a Christian adaptation of his model. We really tried to stay true to the IFS model, but because it is such a it's an inherently spiritual model, we wanted to make it accessible for those with a Christian faith. And so we also tried to stay true to a sort of orthodox Trinitarian Christian faith and combine that with the model. So that's what our book is. But he posited that the soul is comprised of parts.
Yep.
And, that's just as basic as, a part of me is so thrilled to be here with you guys. And a part of me is wanting to do a good job. And a part of me is, hoping I didn't talk too much over there, but all the while I'm present to you. These different parts of us are always active. But in his theory, there are 3 categories of parts. And I think these 3 categories are so helpful to understand. Do you want me to just give a quick overview of them?
Yeah.
The 3 categories, there's 2 categories of protective parts. The manager parts. These are the parts of us that get up in the morning and put on our makeup and get dressed and get to work on time. They're keeping us in control. They're keeping us in charge. They're what we want the world to see. They're trying to keep us from the pain out there. So we want to look good. And this is where the Enneagram comes in. And Ian, we didn't say this in our book, but we actually ran the wheel when we gave examples of protector parts. So you'll see them in there. Some protector parts show up as perfectionistic, some as pleasing, some as performing, some as anxious, some as controlling, right? Those are all the different Enneagram types. Those are, for me as an Enneagram 3, that part of me wants to just be exactly what I need to be in the moment that you need me to be, right? They're not bad, but when they get extreme, that's all we become. And then the second category of parts, these are also protectors, are called the firefighters. And these are the parts of us that put out the flames of pain after it's detected. So they want to numb, shut down, go for the booze, go for the drugs, go for the binge watch, go for the scroll, go whatever it is to numb out any pain. So if you think about most people are really in any given day, they're managing, right? They're getting the job done, and then they go home and they're numbing. That's how a lot of people live. Between those 2 parts, neither of those parts is bad. And that's what's really important.
Yeah. So I love that. And I think you use this in your book, right? And this is Schwartz, right? That there are no bad parts, just good parts stuck in bad roles.
That's
stuck
exactly
in
right.
bad jobs. And so theologically, let's just talk about this for a second. As one person said to me over the weekend, they had this epiphany, super smart guy. And he's like, oh, wait a minute. This defangs everything I was taught growing up about sin. He says, I just was raised in a tradition that said I was bad. And that was the message, And I'm one of those people who doesn't necessarily correct people all the time. I'm like, oh, how interesting. But basically, his takeaway was no bad parts, just good parts stuck in bad jobs.
Yes.
Was a complete mind blower.
Yes.
And I was like, good. I mean, good.
It's so non-pathologizing when you look at it that way. My husband and I, for years, led groups at a local, when we were living in Boston, down in Cambridge, addiction recovery program for men right out of prison. And I would say to them, that part of you, and they couldn't fathom this, that reaches for the drugs that has just wreaked havoc, that part of you, honestly, had good intentions.
Exactly.
It had good intentions. It was trying to protect you. It was trying to help you survive. Now, listen, we got to set some boundaries around that part of you. We got to get you some other ways to cope, to self-soothe. That one's not working. And just to remove that shame.
Yes.
Is almost impossible for some folks, especially with the firefighters, to understand.
So, it's interesting. There's a book by a guy who I have very mixed feelings about. It's Russell Brand. And I'm not a huge Russell Brand fan for a lot of reasons, right? First, sometimes he feels just a little unhinged to me. But he did write a really interesting book called Recovery, which is about his experience with the 12 steps and his experience with, and it actually has some decent ideas in it. But one of the stories he tells in it is he's in treatment and he has this Australian woman, I think she was Australian, and he sits down for her for the first meeting and she looks at him, she goes, "Good on you for finding drugs." And he looked at her like, what are you talking about? She said, "You'd probably be dead if you hadn't." And he said it in the book. It's very moving. He says he just burst into tears when she said it. Because no one had ever said to him, of course you found drugs, and it's actually we're glad you're here. Glad it didn't kill you. We do have to find some alternatives, a new way of being in the world. But as you to put it in the language of IFS, it was a firefighter that was playing an extreme role to try and extinguish or expel the pain of the third category, which is exiles. Let's talk about exiles for a minute.
Exactly. And these are the parts that actually need our attention and our care the most. But these are the parts of us that those managers and firefighters are working to keep at bay. And so the exiles are the vulnerable, the wounded parts of us, the parts of us that carry the pain of our trauma, the pain of our past, the feelings of shame, of fear, of being unwanted, of being invisible, all the pain from all the way back to the present pain. These parts of us carry all of that. These heavy burdens is the language of IFS. They carry these burdens. And these are the parts of us that actually need our care, need us to draw them closer. But what's beautiful about this model that Richard Schwartz stumbled upon just by observing people is that the center is the self.
Yes.
And he calls it the self. We called it in our book the spirit-led self to kind of assuage, the theology of what do we mean by self. That's this my second book, The Best of You, was try to kind of come back to this idea of why self has gotten to become a bad word in some Christian circles when really it's just like Henry Nouwen said, right? It's that place inside of us where we can be beyond these parts and we can lead these parts of us. We can lead that, controlling part of us gently to step back. We can lead that firefighter part of us to just take a pause before making a bad choice. And we can pull in the part of us that's in pain to where the Holy Spirit lives inside of us and where we live in truth and just witness and attune to ourselves with compassion and love in the ways that God attunes to us. And man, that just kind of blew my mind that it's not just that we want these parts to understand who God is. It's that we want them to understand who I am at my core, at my best, as the person God made me to be. The Imago Dei inside of me that actually has what it takes if I can give myself a moment, take those deep breaths to honor the parts and their different agendas and to just help guide them and lead them. And it leads to so much inner intimacy. I've just found this work to be so enriched, rich.
So when I did this, over the course of the weekend, I introduced just basically what we just talked about, right? And I didn't want to go deep into, it was just like, let's just do some work together. It's a very experiential weekend. And then we had guys, sort of draw their inner world with their and I actually like to call it our essential self. So it's that part of us that was our essence at birth, as God designed us, and try to get them in touch with what that essential self is, explaining to them what qualities the essential self has. And let's go through those, right? So when your essential self is present, which is always present, but when you're in touch with it, then you are, let me see if I get this right, compassionate, creative, curious, connected, courageous, confident. I'm missing two.
Calm.
And what was
clear.
And clear.
Clarity. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and clear. And when you're in that space, that's when you say, man, I really feel like myself today. Or man, you really seem like yourself today. Like you're in a good space. And when I'm in that place, and this is because a lot of these people I work with are big leader types. I'm like, here's the deal, guys. This is about good self-governance.
Yes.
So learning to lead yourself before you lead others is like super important. And how to have the ability to monitor and self-regulate, like work with your parts in real time. And I said, you don't have to like do what we're doing here, which is I got them in a chair knee to knee with me and we're doing 30 minutes part work, face to face. I'm like, man, you can do this in 3 minutes. Like you can like in a pinch, you can say, oh, this part of me and I love this idea, right? That there are parts at war in me.
Yes.
Right. So I got a part over here that is like, well, I said this to these guys. I said, look, there is a part of me right now that so loves you and so cares about you and is so happy to be here. And there is a part of me right now that is so worried about disappointing you, about not bringing everything to this weekend like perfectly so that you will look at me and value me and not throw me out of the herd. Right? It's like,
exactly.
And I said, these two parts are really working right now in this moment. And because I know that, I can do some stuff with it to mitigate what could go wrong with this scenario.
And imagine that in marriage. If my husband says to me, a part of me feels really empathetic toward you, and a part of me is really annoyed.
Yes.
It's just literally I'll laugh usually because it's just like, first of all, there's that self-awareness. So there's some regulation there. The other thing I love, Richard Schwartz added the P words, playfulness, perspective.
Yep.
I love those two. It brings a little bit of more playfulness online. And I also love how those qualities of the self really map onto the fruit of the spirit.
Yes.
Too.
Yes.
But not in a sort of saccharine way, in the complexity of what those words, joy is complex.
Yeah.
Some of those, that clarity, it's not the absence of those parts. It's I'm aware of these different things I'm feeling in this moment, and I'm right here with you. I'm with them and I'm with you.
Yes.
And it's really rich.
Anthony, did you know that Americans take about 20,000 breaths a day and spend an average of 90% of their time indoors?
Wow, I never thought about that before.
Well, start thinking about it now, my friend. According to the EPA, the indoor air that we breathe can be up to 100 times more polluted than outdoor air.
Whoa.
Indoor air pollutants can cause respiratory symptoms like sneezing, congestion, scratchy throat, and even more serious health problems like lung and heart disease. In fact, my assistant Wendy experienced a mold problem in her house, which led to her whole family experiencing respiratory issues for months.
So what's the solution?
Well, she began using the Air Doctor 3500 to clean her indoor air and could tell the difference right away. Not only did the air smell clean, but their congestion and scratchy throats went away. She continues to use it to filter out 99.99% of dangerous contaminants so their lungs don't have to. This includes allergens, pollen, pet dander, dust mites, mold spores, and even bacteria and viruses. The Air Doctor comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you don't love it, just send it back for a refund minus shipping. Just head to airdoctorpro.com and use the promo code TypologyPodcast, and you'll receive up to $300 off air purifiers. Exclusive to podcast customers, you will also receive a free 3-year warranty on any unit, which is an additional $84 value. Lock in this special offer by going to airdoctorpro.com and use promo code TypologyPodcast. So, as you know, I'm in recovery for both alcohol and drugs. And I was raised in a home where my father died from drinking and drugs. Never got sober, never saw him sober in my life. So you can imagine, I carried a lot of trauma. A lot of things went sideways in my house growing up. There were always ambulances and police cars showing up. It just was a hard environment, right? And when I look back now through the lens of IFS, internal family systems work, I can see that there were multiple exiles that came about as a result of those experiences, right? So sub-personalities or other personalities that were just wounded like heck. And some of them early on, I couldn't even approach. They were just so painful. And then this firefighter part discovers alcohol In fact, I discovered alcohol when and I talk about this in the fix, right? Like when I was about 8 years old.
Yeah.
Because everyone's drinking like crazy in my Irish Catholic household. And it's like, well, why wouldn't I go try that out, right? And then it discovered pot, and then it discovered pills, and then it discovered sex, and then it discovered smoking a pack of Camel non-filters every day. And then it discovered all these different firefighters that were trying to douse the flames of the exiles that kept surfacing. And I remember when I first got sober, this is 1987, that I literally hit a wall. I was beginning to have panic attacks. I was deeply depressed. I'm hiding booze around the house. I'm drinking all the time. I'm trying to hide it from everybody. And by the way, I'm in ministry at the same time. Okay. Because I'm trying to manage two different worlds.
You have some good manager parts. You had some really effective manager parts, it sounds like.
Oh yeah. Those manager parts got me through, we talked about through college. They got me through a lot of my early life.
Yeah.
Like growing up in crazy land.
Yeah.
And so when I first realized, oh, wait a minute, that alcoholic, drug addict part of me is only a part. And this is something that's so important for people. It's like, it is not the sum total of me. It is just like firefighters that had good intentions, but they came up with maladaptive strategies to put out the fire of the exiles. And then I spent the next 10 years trying to figure out the exiles, right? I mean,
That's it. It's actually amazing when you describe that, and I picture you, young man at a good college, getting it done on one hand, those parts of you. And we say this in IFS, we say, let's give that part of you a medal for its years of hard work. Yes. Those parts of you that were getting out of bed, hungover, getting to class, getting the grades, those other parts of you that were, doing whatever to soothe the pain, to keep all that pain at bay. That's amazing. Now, that's a fragmented system.
Yep.
Right? That's what we mean by fragmented. And it's actually kind of amazing that you can do that to survive. You didn't know any better. And then the work is to begin to bring all that into your conscious awareness, And it's just so powerful. So yes, I think that it's not to look back with shame. It's to go, oh my goodness, that's how a system, my inner workings, figured out how to survive an impossible situation.
Yes. And so, I'm super stoked about this because, as I get older, my mission seems to be more and more, how God works, right? It's like just opportunities keep arising and arising and arising and arising. And you're like, oh, that's interesting. And also your interest keeps getting stoked. And it's like, I have such a heart for people with addictions.
Yeah.
I mean, alcoholism, drug addicts, food addicts, whatever, you name it, any addict. But by the way, I think everybody's an addict, but that's a separate topic. And I really see this as being the work, using it in the work, because most addicts who are in recovery for some season, but in the early points, there's so much shame.
Yes.
And so much confusion. How did I get here? And they're always like, well, I don't understand how I got here. It's like, and what IFS, this model does is it really gives them an aha moment where it's like, oh, now I get it.
And it honors the complexity that we're not one thing.
Yes.
Because you're also aware that you're doing the firefighting, and one of the things, Ian, I was thinking about when you talked about being 8, so often the work takes you to that early memory. And there's that inner child, right? There's that young you that's still living out of your conscious awareness. Nobody was with those young parts of us back then, to help us. As Gabor Mate says, trauma is unwitnessed pain.
Yes.
Right? So you've got that pain. You don't know what it is as a child. You don't know what that pain is. And when no one's coming alongside of you and saying, yes, this is scary. Yes, this is hard. You're just left to fend for yourself. So often the work in IFS leads you right back to the place where that wound occurred through the power of this internal work, where you can really be with that young part of you,
right,
and reparent yourself, and
yeah,
and give yourself that compassion that young part of you needed way back then. And
yeah.
it's really incredible work.
Mm-hmm.
It's really powerful.
So by way of review, and then I'm going to ask you a question, we have internal family systems teaches that we are not a unitary mind, but actually we are, or a unitary personality, a single personality. But we are composed of many sub-personalities, parts, right? And one set are called, they're protectors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Managers are a protector, and they are, as I understand it, proactive and often future-minded, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay,
Yes.
I have to, and it's proactive. They're kind of online
Yes.
all the time, right? It's like,
Yes.
I got, as you said, like, okay, the alarm's ringing. I'm going to get up. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to, do this and they're protective, right? And then we have firefighters who are reactive.
Yep, exactly.
Right. And they're more present oriented. So it's like, oh, wait a minute, I'm in pain right now. Put out that fire.
That's right. Exactly.
And that might be through watching 50 episodes of Seinfeld while eating a tub of ice cream, or watching porn. And oftentimes firefighters are or do become addictions, right?
Yes. Yes. When they get extreme, they become addictions. Like,
Right.
to your point, most of us have a form of an addiction. At their best, they're the parts that remind us, oh, I need to soothe. I need comfort.
Yeah.
I need a healthy escape. Right. At their best, they remind us to slow down, to rest, to care for ourselves.
Right.
That's what we want from those parts of us.
Yeah. And then we have exiles, which are young parts of us usually, right? That carry trauma, that carry pain, often pain that we don't know how to approach because it's too overwhelming. It's too big for us. And the role of those firefighters and managers is to keep that pain hidden. Specifically the feelings and emotions that arise when those things surface, those parts of the surface, right? And then there's the essential self. So let's just talk about that for a second, all right? Because you are very interested in the intersection between psychology and theology, or spirituality, we might say. What do you say to somebody who's like, you are fundamentally bad, sin has infected all these parts of you, and you are depraved, and there is nothing good in you, that kind of person, right? What do you say to that person?
The first place I go with that, there's a couple of places, and you kind of said it, is, first of all, I believe in original goodness.
Yes.
Before the fall, God made us and called us good. And to your point, that exists inside each and every one of us, that original Imago Dei that God made to shine a little part of God to the world, right?
Right.
That is just as true. And so I'm not necessarily going to take somebody on, to argue against. I believe in sin. I believe that we are, whatever word you want to use, whether we're imperfect, we're fallen, that's just true. But the truth is, we don't talk enough about that original goodness.
Yeah.
And people just haven't heard that message. What if God called you good?
Right.
Before shame entered in.
And that's what we mean when we talk about the essential self or the spirit-led self, right?
Yes.
That there is this God particle. I like to think about it. It's like a particle of God in us. And who actually it was before now, and the person who championed that idea was Thomas Merton.
Yes.
And Merton did it so brilliantly. Nouwen approaches him, but doesn't quite get to the level of genius of Merton in my mind. Merton would talk about that at our core, there is a part of us that has never been traumatized, that has never been sexually abused, that is untainted, it's unmarred. It is the immortal diamond, which is where, Richard got his book title. And so I just love it when I go, there is a part of you in there, this essential self that has not been touched by anything the rest of you has experienced. And it is compassionate, clear, creative, and all the things we just said, right?
That's who we are and who we will be.
Yes. And what we want to do is, as I understand it, is to get the essential self to be in touch with it enough and to inhabit it enough that it becomes a trusted leader among all the other parts.
That's right.
Because they are not sure the essential self is going to take care of them, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, they're out. You can almost use the language of attachment. I think of these internal attachments. And so in IFS therapy, it's the attachment to the therapist is important, but what I really want is for the parts of you to begin to gain more trust and more security with the essential you.
Yes.
That they trust that you will show up for them when they need
yes.
it. Right? There's that internal attachment. That's what brings us back to integration.
Yeah.
Internal integration.
Yeah, I love this. Do you see how excited I'm getting? I love this conversation, right? Hey, folks, everybody has addictive patterns. Whether it's people-pleasing, endlessly scrolling through TikTok, workaholism, unhealthy relationships, or drug and alcohol abuse, all of us as human beings look for the next fix to help numb and endure the constant emotional, psychological, and spiritual distress that all of us feel because we live in a busted world. The problem is that using external solutions for internal problems is like going to the hardware store to buy bread. It just doesn't work. And that's why I wrote The Fix, How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and everyone in between. The 12 steps are a spiritual design for living that can profoundly change the lives, not just of people with identified addictions like drug and alcohol, but of everyone. And that means you. Both The Fix and the companion workbook are now available for pre-order anywhere books are sold, such as Audible, Barnes & Noble, Target, Books A Million, and Amazon. Just visit ianmorgancron.com/thefix to get your copy today. So just to close out on this, because I want to talk about the new book, how would you describe, in a sentence or two, what is the end goal of internal family systems therapy? How would you describe what the end game is?
Harmony. I like the word harmony. You could say integration. What I like about harmony is if you think about, and this is a metaphor Dick Schwartz uses, orchestra with a conductor. There are many parts. It's hard to achieve harmony. They all have to learn to work together. They need a conductor, which is the self, the essential self, the spirit-led self. And it makes a beautiful music, right? When it's all working together. Sometimes there's a cacophony inside, and that's okay because we have the tools now to bring the pieces back together.
Oh man, this is good. So, all right. So let's talk about the Enneagram and internal family systems just really quickly. Here's an idea I have, and I bet you share it. So we believe that everybody contains all nine types. That's just a given in the Enneagram. But there's just one that we camp in more than the other 8. And it actually does describe our typical patterns of thinking, acting, and behaving. Thinking, acting, and behaving. Would you say that, the Enneagram says you have a personality type, not types? Would you say that each of those 9 types represents a part that you camp out in more than, or you rely on more than others? Well, how would you describe the integration?
That's how and I'm by no means an expert. But what has worked best for me is to think of each number as a part. And I have a relationship to each part. For me, the 3 is, like you said, the closest. I'm there the most. The 2 is right next to it. I have a strong relationship with a 5 part that I bring in when I'm overwhelmed. I have a strong relationship with the 7 part. There are some parts that are more elusive to me. But to me, I look at those as resources that I do want to cultivate. Again, to think of that internal attachment. I want a healthy relationship with each of those parts of me. And I just think it's a really helpful way to name some of those different parts that we all have.
Man, we could go forever on this. I can just feel
good.
it. So, all right, let us hop to I Shouldn't Feel This Way, your new book. Subtitle is Name What's Hard, Tame Your Guilt, Transform Self-Sabotage into Brave Action. How does this book fall in? You've got 2 other books, right? Where does it fall in this trilogy? Like, what's the natural progression of these 3 books, if there is any?
Yeah, Boundaries for Your Soul is really the deep dive into this IFS model, and it's that integration piece. the best of you is really me trying to uncover this idea of true self as a Christian, in particular as a Christian woman.
Hard.
Right? All these messages about deny yourself. The self is bad. Don't trust yourself. It's really digging in, especially for women, especially for people who have felt marginalized. Like, I'm trying to kill a self I never was taught to have. Right? Which is so many people's stories. So that's what the best of you was. That was really personal for me. And then I shouldn't feel this way is really, I like to think of it as sort of the entry level, the prequel to Boundaries for Your Soul for people who are like these parts. That seems a little weird. It's just this idea, and being an Enneagram 3 and being out of touch with my emotions at times, that the conflicting emotions, it's all about these different experiences, these different states that we experience. And so for me, a lot of the stuff in the vernacular about emotions, name your emotions, is like, well, which, I go into my journal and it's like, well, I'm mad, but I'm sad, but I'm worried, but I'm tired. That can be, and just kind of learning that process of naming the different things we're feeling from that place inside, from that calm nervous system. So I'm trying to use sort of more accessible language. What does it mean to be in the carpool lane? Just kind of noticing, man, I'm kind of jealous of those other moms, or man, just that kind of self-awareness, that entry level point. And then what does it mean to frame? I talk about framing, discerning those emotions, and then taking steps on behalf of them. So really going more into emotions. Again, many of us got these messages to sideline our emotions, even in outside of Christian circles sometimes. And also Richard Schwartz talks about this. Modern meditation almost teaches you to bypass emotions, as opposed to kind of noticing them, becoming aware of them. So that's where I shouldn't feel this way comes in, maybe a prequel, more of a user-friendly, accessible version for those who aren't ready to go so deep into the parts work.
Wow, that's really good. And I love that you're giving people a sort of an entry point. And then if they want to, they can go further down the wormhole and dive it. And I just would recommend to people both books, because some of us need a gateway. And then I think also when we get to the parts work, it's actually so common sensible. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, which of us has never grown up saying, I don't know, a part of me is really angry right now. I mean, people say talking parts language naturally all the ding dang time.
Exactly.
So it's like, well, of course it just kind of makes sense. And it also makes sense of having conflicting feelings.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
We all have them.
Yeah. And we don't have multiple personality disorder. We just have lots of parts.
And we have to learn to make wise decisions. We actually have to learn to honor the inner tensions.
Okay, so give me an example. Let's come up with a scenario. Give me an example of how that work, what that work looks like, and as you talk about it, and I shouldn't feel this way.
So a lot of guilt comes, for example, I love my kids and I desperately need space for my kids.
Right.
So we don't know how to process those two conflicting feelings, and so we just feel guilt all the time.
Right.
I love my spouse, and this part of my spouse really drives me crazy.
Yeah.
Those two things are both true.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really mad at my sister, and I have a lot of empathy for her. And so when we don't take the time to pause to that dialectic, right? Both of those things are true. Both of those things matter. We tend to default. Again, a lot of my work, I write. I shouldn't feel this way is for everyone, but a lot of us tend to default we don't. The one that's angry, well, that's the bad one. The one that feels empathy, or the one that feels like I should be with my kids all the time, that's the one I should go with. It's not, actually. What we need to do is to honor. This is how we grow in both honoring ourselves and simultaneously honoring the people in our lives, right? That's why where that self piece of the God, others, self triangle is very important. And I think the most underaddressed in many ways. I'm not saying the culture is right to elevate self to be the only thing, but that self piece of, okay, I'm both frustrated with this person and I value this relationship. That is so often true. And often in culture, we get these very one-dimensional memes. Well, just say no, just set boundaries, or just cut out the relationship, or just do you. Or on the other side of things, just always be there for other people. Just always give the best. Neither of those things is helpful. Yeah. So often the truth is I'm really frustrated and I need to do something about that. And I value this relationship. And that's a much more nuanced way forward, but it starts with honoring those two conflicting feelings.
I love it. I love it. All right. So how do you reconcile when you have mixed emotions? So can you give me an example of where you come out the other side of some process and with clarity and wisdom?
Yeah. So the 3-step process in the book, name what's hard. You start with yourself. These are the things I'm feeling without shame, without guilt. I love this person and I want to rip their head off, whatever the things are, right? And that's between you and God. That's your inner work. You frame it. And when we talk about framing, this is the least glamorous, but I talk about those liminal places, those places in between that we all have to learn to take. It could be as tiny as a walk every day. It could be a deep breath. It could be a 30-day recovery program, right? It can be big, it can be little, but learning to build consciously and intentionally those times in your day to notice what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and to discern what you're thinking and you're feeling. Man, I've noticed I'm really frustrated with this person and it's not just going away. I wonder what that's about. I'm not going to do anything about it. We're still framing. But I'm going to take the next few days and notice this. Is there something going on? Is that person being a jerk to me? And I actually need to address that. Or am I being overly sensitive? I don't know which one it is. I just know, right? So framing is that discipline, for lack of a better word, of creating these spaces. I don't care how busy we are. You can be in traffic. Turn off the radio and notice what's going on in your mind. Notice those feelings. Notice those emotions. Pay attention to the cues. And then the third step that I walk people through is brave. That's when we start to take action. All right, I've sat with this. I've noticed without shame, without guilt. These are the kind of constellation of feelings I've got. I've got to have this hard conversation now. Or actually, I don't think this other person's doing something wrong. I think I need to cope a little bit better. So I need to pick up, right? So it's really a practical book. I give sort of really practical things for each of those steps, but then I run those 3 steps through different things, thinking traps, numbing what, comparing ourselves to other toxic relationships.
Right.
Toxic relationships evoke really complicated emotions inside of us.
Yes.
If I had $1 for every time somebody said to me, I wish I'd left sooner, and I say, there's a reason you didn't leave sooner.
Yeah.
There's such a cocktail of emotions when you're in an abusive relationship. You have to honor the time that it takes you to work through that, right? So there's a lot of practical applications through those different scenarios. Yeah. And then our faith is the last one.
Faith, okay.
Complicated feelings about God.
I was going to ask, I heard frame it, brave, and you said that was number 3. Could you just do them real quick again?
Name what's hard, frame your reality, and then brave a new path. So name, frame, brave. And then applied to relationships, to our relationship with God is, that's the one for me that has been, again, just undoing some of those messages. We can feel a lot about God. We can feel a lot of confusion.
For sure.
And so that's where the tame your guilt, right? Just giving ourselves permission to inhabit what we really feel, not so that we stay there, but so that we're wise about how we honor ourselves and honor the relationships that we love.
Wow, Alison, this has been such a rockin' conversation. I just want to remind everybody we're talking with Dr. Alison Cook, author of the best-selling books, The Best of You, co-author of Boundaries for Your Soul, and now the new book, I Shouldn't Feel This Way, Name What's Hard, Tame Your Guilt, and Transform Self-Sabotage into Brave Action, I should say. Alison, I cannot wait to be on your podcast later this week because we're just going to pick up where we left off. Thanks for being on. And how do people learn more about you?
dralisoncook.com is my website, socials. I have my own podcast. I can't wait to interview you for The Best of You. But that's the easiest way to find me is dralisoncook.com.
Wow. This has been so freaking rich. And I love the work that you're doing and have done. And I'm stoked to jump into I Shouldn't Feel This Way, Name What's Hard, Tame Your Guilt, and Transform Self-Sabotage into Brave Action. Alison, thank you.
Thank you, guys. So grateful for you both. I've so appreciated your voices in my life.
Thank you. And listen, typology friends, may you have love, may you have joy. May you have peace, may you have healing, and may you have rest until the next time.